This is the project management trifecta in Monday.com. The Gantt view, timeline column, and also dependency columns. And I'll walk you through how to use all of those in conjunction with one another in this video today. By the way, if you'd like us to help you set up Monday.com for your business, check out the link below. We'd love to help. Anyway, as you can see here, I'm inside of my example Monday.com system. I have an example projects board. This is the most basic, most rudimentary projects board in the existence of Monday.com, but I'm going to keep it simple for the sake of this video today. Now, what we want to be looking at is how do dependency columns work? How does a timeline column work? And then how does a Gantt view work? And then how do they work in conjunction with one another? Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the basics to start with, and that's going to be just by creating a new timeline column. So press the plus button and let's go ahead and create a new timeline. Now, a timeline column, and why it's different from a date column inside of Monday.com, is because a timeline has a start date and a finish date. So it goes over a series of days. So if you click into the timeline, you can see and select a start date and also an end date. Now, your start date and end date can in fact be on the same day if you wanted it to. It can be a couple of days if you wanted it to be, or it can be months and months and months and months and months. Okay, so it depends how you're using the system or the Monday.com system. But in this video today, what I want you to imagine is item 1 is related to item 2 and item 2 is related to item 3. So let's just say project 1, phase 1. Hit enter. And then we've got project 1, phase 2. Spelling not good. Phase 2. And then I'm just going to copy and paste that and then put phase 3. So these are different phases associated with the same project. Now, how you'd actually handle this in the real world, slightly different, but this is just an example for the video today. So we've got our timeline column. What we want to do, click in and press the 3-dotted button, just go to settings, and we can customize our timeline column. So we can show the week number, we can show set as milestone, which I'll walk you through in a moment, and then we can enable and disable weekends. Now, the reason that the weekends thing is important is because if you have weekends included, it counts the duration in the number of days. If it spans over multiple weeks, it includes the weekend. Now, if you don't want to enable weekends, it means that the duration, 4 days, as you can see here, if I hover over it, 4 days. If I then set this to the 11th to the 18th, you can see that it's 6 days, but because it doesn't include the Saturday and the Sunday. Whereas if I go to settings, customize timeline column and enable the weekends, it's going to show me 8 days. So it includes the weekend. So just bear that in mind as a factor to consider here. We've also got set as milestone. So if I go ahead and click this option, it will set it as a milestone, and you can see that it indicates that it's a milestone by this diamond shape here. Milestones can only be on one day, and then a milestone is related to the progress of a project. So how you choose to use that is entirely up to you. You can select that or unselect that. It's entirely up to you. So we've got our phase 1, we've got our phase 2, and let's just say our 21st to the 28th here. And then from the 29th to, let's say, the 9th, we've got our different phases and the different days for this particular project. Okay, so this has been set up in our timeline. Phase 1 is between the 11th and the 18th. Phase 2 is between the 21st and the 28th, and phase 3 is the 29th to the 9th of September. So we can see how that's cascading across. Obviously, this is not something you'd be able to achieve with a standard date column inside of Monday.com. But where this gets more interesting is if you press the 3-dotted button and go to settings, and then we can set this as a deadline. So then we can associate the status column and the person column with the timeline column, making it as a consequence a deadline, which if we press connect boards or connect columns, you can see that this then automatically reflects based on the status. So you can see that we are behind schedule here. We change this to new, change this to new, change this as new. We can set this one as active, for example. And we can see here that this is behind schedule because the status is not completed, but the due date was on the 21st. So maybe if we set this to the 11th to the 21st, we're still in time. When it ticks over to tomorrow, we will then be behind schedule again. So that is something to consider here, and I definitely would recommend having this set up. We've also got add and edit date reminders if you want to, and you can connect a duration column. So you can create a numbers column, and then the numbers column will show you the duration in days between the start date and end date for each of the rows or records. Is not that important. It's up to you. If you want to use that, check out another video on my channel explaining kind of more detail about the timeline column specifically. I'm just giving you a more general run through today. But obviously, and what is important to note, is that our phases are connected to one another, but there's no way of indicating currently that they are quote unquote associated. And what I mean by that is we can't start phase 2 until phase 1's been completed. And we need a way of connecting those. So that's where the dependency column comes in. So we go ahead and press the plus button, and we want to search for the dependency column type. This allows us, once it's set up, to connect one phase to the other, and make them dependent on one another. So firstly, we need to choose our dependency mode type. We have 3 modes. Flexible means if you change one mode and it goes backwards in time, it doesn't update the others, and it's a more fluid structure. You can see here by the animation that if you move it forward, it updates the others, but if you move it backwards, it doesn't. Whereas strict means that if you change one, they all change back or forward no matter what. And then no action means that if phase 1 is impacted, it doesn't affect phase 2 or phase 3, as you can see here. I personally prefer the flexible approach, but again, strict might be a slightly better to keep everything on track. I think flexible makes the most sense. So then we can choose the column for item dependencies. Now, as we only have one column on our board that's a date column, either a date or a timeline, just select the timeline column and make sure that's selected, and just go ahead and press save. Now, when it comes to dependencies, it's actually really easy to set up. So it's a lot like a connection column within inside of Monday.com. So I can make phase 2 dependent on phase 1. All I need to do is click in here, and then I am searching for the different items. As you can see that we're on phase 2, I need to connect phase 2 dependent on phase 1. Now I'm on phase 3, and I need to say that phase 3 is actually dependent on phase 2. So all I would do is click that option here. So now I can see these are dependent on one another. Obviously, at the moment, there's nothing dependent on phase 1, whereas phase 2 is dependent on phase 1 and phase 3 is dependent on phase 2. So you can set those up automatically. Now, there is a new feature that's recently come out which will allow you to connect dependencies to other boards, which is slightly more interesting. Not going to cover that in too much detail in today's video, but that is available. What you can do on the dependency if you ever need to is adjust the settings. So you can always click in and make some changes. Dependencies also work on a sub-item level as well. So if one sub-item is dependent on another sub-item, then dependencies can be set up for those as well. This obviously depends more on how you are actually managing your projects, your phases, and ultimately the tasks associated with those phases and those projects. By no stretch of the imagination is this like an optimal project management setup within Monday.com. It's merely just to demonstrate the timeline, the dependency, and the Gantt view. So now we've set up our dependencies. We have our timeline for our different phases for this particular project. What I will then want to go ahead and do is create a new Gantt view. So we press the plus button up the top here, go ahead and select the Gantt option. What I would firstly recommend doing is just pressing the 3 dotted button in the top right hand corner and docking this widget. That means it takes up the entirety of the screen. Now, a few things to cover. First and foremost, we've got this baseline option, and I'll come on to that in a moment about how we can add new snapshots. But we've also got our today, so this takes us straight to today. We've got auto fit, so this zooms us in or out, and then based on that we've got days, weeks, months, quarters, and years. So we can zoom in to days, and then we can kind of zoom out but zoom in, if that makes sense. We've also got weeks. Again, we can zoom in and zoom out for our weeks, and then we got months, and then of course I think we have quarters as well. And then we have finally years, and again you can click in and click out. You get the idea, right? It's like a standard calendar, but anytime you need to go back to where you are today, you can just press that button there. We've also got a split like display type, so you can split between a Gantt, a table, and then split mode, so then you can see both at the same time. Now people do like this split mode. That means you can see all of the different projects and the timelines, and then if you move things about, which we'll show you in a moment, this will update automatically. So I'm just going to go back to our Gantt view for the time being. You can export this if you want to. You can undock this widget and make it smaller and have other widgets on your quote-unquote inboard dashboard if you want to, but then we want to go ahead and look at the settings functionality. So first and foremost, you need to tell the Gantt view which date column or date-esque column you want to pull in. So we've only got the timeline column on the main table, but if you had multiple date columns, you'd need to just make sure that you've selected the right one, which in this instance is the timeline column. I don't want the date column for the sub-item, so I'm just going to untick that. So that's pulling in the right data. We can then decide what we want to group by. So grouping will group on the left-hand side here, and we can group by a number of different things. We could group by the board, which probably doesn't make sense in this case, as there only is one board. We could group by the person, so who is assigned these different different phases for each of the different projects. You group by the status if you wanted to. That does then kind of begin to make a mess of the mapping function here. And then you could group by the group if you wanted to as well. I think person would probably, in my opinion, make the most sense. Let me show you how that looks. So if I click into here and say all of these phases are assigned to me, and then these phases are assigned to Sakil, you can go back to our Gantt view and we'll be able to see Nick Boardman is assigned. And then if we just set some random arbitrary timelines for this, and then we'll make item 5 dependent on item 4, just to give you an example of how this works. Then go back to our Gantt view, you can see the breakdown by person on the left hand side. So that's the grouping by. We've then got the label. So what do we want to literally label each of these options? So I mean, name is typically the easiest one, right? So it's easy to see what phase it is when you're actually on here as opposed to looking on the left hand side. You've got other options as well. Person, you could label by the status, but I don't think status makes so much sense, and I'll show you why in a moment. You've got group and board, but again, I'm just going to leave it as name for the time being. We've then got color by. This is personally why I wouldn't necessarily label by the status, is because you can actually color by the status. So now we can see the color reflects the status. If I then go ahead and change this to, let's say, completed, this to active, and then this to new or not started yet, you can see how the colors update. Cool. So then we've got visual settings. We can show the dependencies, which are showing anyway. I mean, that was automatically ticked, or you can untick it. The dependencies are indicated by the line, in case you hadn't noticed. So that is dependent on that, etc., etc. You can show a group summary. So if you want to, you've got the group summary up here. We can show the today's indication, which is just a fancy blue line. We can show the weekends or hide the weekends. Now, obviously, if we go to days and then show weekend, it will show the weekend, or we can just hide the weekend. So that's up to you. That also reflects back to how you've set up your timeline column. So you can see here, I've got enable weekends ticked. If I untick this, then it's what's the word that I'm looking for? It makes sense on both sides. It makes sense on the timeline and on the Gantt view. And then we've got show color legend. So this is down the bottom here. Obviously, we are colored by the different status options. So we can, of course, see that very, very easily. So those are your visual settings. You've then got a critical path. Now you can show the critical path. You can also hide the critical path. This shows you all of the things that need to be done to get completed. So you can see here it's showing, as indicated, the different stages that are required to get this project completed. So that is the path for this project. So identify all the individual tasks that must be completed to finish a project on time. And you can see it shows that very, very easily. You can also hide that as well. Cool. It's critical path is quite helpful. And then we've got fiscal year. So you can define your fiscal year. So when there's a start month and ultimately the start year. So ours is actually, in fact, January 2025 is when we start. And then we've got baselines. So baselines are quite helpful if you've got a lot of moving projects and things change all the time. You might choose to take what's called a snapshot. It's essentially like a screenshot of the state of the Gantt view at a particular time, and then you can show or hide it. So I could go ahead and add a new snapshot. This is essentially going to snapshot my Gantt view, and it's called baseline of timeline 21st of August 2025 or 25. If I then go back to my main table, you'll notice here that a new timeline column has been automatically added. So just be mindful of this. This is the snapshot of your Gantt view at the time that you pressed snapshot. Okay, you can hide it or show it. So obviously you can see the green or not. It's entirely up to you. One thing to bear in mind is ultimately if a project changes and moves across, so let's say this got delayed, I can then reference back to my snapshot and I can see what's actually happened. So has this been delayed? Have things improved in speed? Like what's going on? We always have the snapshot so we can see what's going on or where we were in reference to where we are currently now. So how frequently you choose to do the snapshot, whether you choose to use it at all, is entirely up to you, but that's just something to be mindful of. You can obviously hide it. You don't need to have it, or you can show it, and then you can show the baseline. You can also have as many snapshots as you would like, but just bear in mind that every time you take a new snapshot, it is going to create two new columns, the baseline of timeline with the date and the difference as well. And then you go back to the Gantt view. I'm just going to hide it for the time being. Cool. So then we have our groups. We can hide or show all of the groups. Now we would probably only want to show the new and active groups. We don't want the projects that are sat in the completed projects group to show on here. I mean, we might do. Again, stuff like this is entirely up to you. Now you'll notice when I was messing around with the baselines, we can easily move our different phases for our project around by just dragging and dropping. What you'll also notice is because we're using the flexible dependency, when I'm moving it back, the others don't come back as well, but when I move things forward, they do. Like I said, this can always be changed. So you can go to your dependency, go to your settings, and let's say we want to enable strict mode instead now. And then if I move this back, they'll all move back. And you can see why that's slightly different. So preference is entirely up to you, what makes most sense for you. If I then go back to my main table and then just go back to settings, customize, and go to flexible again, you can change between them very, very easily. Okay, so now obviously if I change it, reposition it, it adjusts. If I reduce the time, this updates the timeline column. If I then go to my split mode, which is always quite useful, I can then change this, and let's say this is the 14th to the 19th. There we go. Then that will update automatically on the Gantt view as well, as you can see here. So you can manage from this level and from this level. This is quite a helpful view, but you can see why the timeline in conjunction with the Gantt view and also the dependency columns makes so much sense for project management. It makes things so much easier. So now I can change the status to completed for this, and then this one is now active, and we can see where we are with things. I can then move this back. I could then, let's say, move this back. I could then reposition this as well. Again, depending on your dependency mode settings, you can move things around really, really easily. Of course, you can always change the groupings by. So if you want to group by something else, whatever the case might be, however you're trying to manage this, you can do. So you can group by group if you want to. Where it does get slightly more confusing is, let's say you're grouping by status. You can see that we've got new for here, and then new for phase 1 and phase 2 is completed, but then this goes up. There's unfortunately no way of putting this above this. As well, I'm trying to think actually, if we reposition this all around, let's see if that updates. So let's press apply, and we can see we've got completed, active, new. Okay, I mean, either way, it's going to look a little bit weird, if I'm honest. I mean, that kind of makes sense. If you've got it the other way around, I suppose it will flow down. This is where that critical path comes into use, because you can see the critical path, even if it's a mess across a lot of different groups, with many different projects all being managed in one board inside of monday.com. The only other thing that is worth mentioning is just using filter criteria. So you could filter and say, show me only where the person is equal to me. So then this is going to show me only my projects, and this is dynamic, so it would show for other people as well. You can then save that to this view. So every time anyone comes onto the Gantt view, it's only going to show them projects for them. And that's pretty much it. You can search. Again, you've also got other filter criteria if you want to, but that is pretty much everything. Of course, the timeline column and the dependency column with the Gantt view can be applied to sub items as well, but this depends more on your architecture for project management within monday.com. But hopefully this has given you a good start on how to use the timeline column, the dependency column, and then the Gantt view all in conjunction with one another to hopefully make project management a bit easier for your business. If you've got any questions, queries, comments, want to know more, drop a comment in the comment section below, naturally, right? I will do my best to answer the question. If it's a really good question, I will make a video answering the question. And then if you need help setting up monday.com for your business, doing stuff like this, or automations, or integrations, or using AI, or literally anything else, check out the link below in the description. We would love to help. You can apply to book a meeting with me. We can have a conversation about how we could potentially help your business with stuff like this, and we could go from there. Anyway, thank you ever so much for taking the time to watch this video. Hopefully it's been somewhat useful, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.